Welcome to Future-Proof Business, smart strategies, real insights, and tools to lead and scale in a fast-changing world. Let's future-proof your success.
Welcome to the Future-Proof Business Podcast. I'm your host, Daniel Rosenstein. Today, I have the honor of interviewing Andy Neillie. Andy, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
My pleasure. So glad to be with you. Looking forward to a spirited discussion.
Definitely. Can you share a little bit about yourself and background and like what you do with the audience today, please?
Sure. I do two things. You and I've talked a little bit about this, Daniel. I have been a speaker, an author, a consultant, and a coach for more than 25 years. I've got 5 million frequent flyer miles from traveling around the world, doing keynotes and workshops. I've got a doctorate in leadership. I've written several books. I'm passionate about turning managers into leaders. That's a tagline for the Neillie Leadership Group. And you and I have found common ground in that area because we both want to help people grow personally and professionally. Totally apart from that, but completely integrated with that, my wife and I own a multi-unit franchise here in Central Texas. We have 5 year-round indoor child-friendly swim schools. I have about 175 employees. It'll be a $5 million business this year. I've got a team of 7 managers that I directly manage, and we did 200,000 swim lessons last year. We help kids get safe in the water. It's a personal passion of mine. It also came about through some hardship and needing to make a pivot 15 years ago. Daniel, today I split my time. When I'm in Austin, like I am right now, I'm heavily involved in swim school management and leadership. And I'll be flying to Scottsdale this weekend and on to Chicago next week. I wear 2 different hats, but they're an integrated set of hats. My passion for turning managers into leaders, the hothouse is these businesses my wife and I own. And then the discussions I get to have with emerging leaders around the country and really globally is from the lessons that I'm learning.
Congratulations on all your success. I mean, that's a really amazing accomplishment to have so many employees, you're helping so many people.
It doesn't feel like an amazing accomplishment when you've got to make payroll in the lean months and pay leases, even when COVID makes you lock your doors, but you have landlords saying, you owe us our lease payment. Not as successful as it looks.
Well, can I ask you, what inspired you to get into leadership and want to help other people, develop their leadership skills?
Yeah. There's really 2 things, Daniel. One, I became a follower of Christ early in my life, and my faith really informed. I don't come from a church family, but I had a young friend in elementary school invite me to a church camping program, and I grew up strong in my faith. And I'm reading in the Gospels about this wonderful servant leader. And then, Daniel, it wasn't even my career. It was like pre-career jobs. I'm working my way through college in construction. And I had a couple of really bad bosses and anger management issues and selfish. And I'm reading about the greatest servant leader who ever lived. And then I'm working for a boss where if he had a power tool in his hand and you were nearby when he got angry, you better run and duck. And I just thought, this doesn't line up. This is not the way it's supposed to be. And it ignited a passion in me that nobody should work for a bad boss. And so I've just always had that unction, if you would, that no bad bosses. Now, you and I are both, committed to making sure we get our voices out and help people grow. When I went to a marketing group a number of years ago, they said, Andy, no bad bosses is not really a good branding and marketing thing. Let's find a positive spin on that. And really, that's been my passion. I've written several books on it. I've traveled around the globe talking to managers and emerging managers about what it takes to be a good leader, because I had some bad bosses that were not the kind of bosses you and I would want to work for.
Yeah, I think most of us have unfortunately had that experience. I mean, I've had that experience, and it definitely woke me up to have gratitude to the people who are nice. And made me realize that not everybody is benevolent and is looking out for the best of you. And some people, they take out their own personal issues at work. It's not supposed to, but they do anyway.
It's interesting to use that term benevolent, because being a good boss doesn't mean you're the easy pushover boss. In fact, good bosses make hard decisions and have hard conversations. But that benevolence piece, that my first job is to make my people more successful, not to have them make me more successful. That, I think you're onto something when we talk about that.
Definitely. Do you work with people in certain industries, or do you help work with companies and businesses in all industries?
Yeah. It's very interesting. I've worked for a bunch of Fortune 500 companies where I find the greatest satisfaction is working in what the experts call the SMB space, small and medium business. Privately held companies. I do a lot of work in the trades and in construction because I worked my way up through all of that. And then I do a lot of work in the insurance space in these privately held companies. They don't have CEOs who went to Harvard Business School, and they don't have executive boards. This is the Chuck in a truck, the Dan with a van, who 15 years later has 25 vans. Nobody taught him how to cultivate the mid-level managers. And so when I get to work with a manager, a business owner like that, where they're smart people, they're diligent people, they're hardworking people, and I give them a simple leadership model to invest in their people, man, I find that tremendously satisfying. So I am a small business owner myself. Probably some of that is easy for me because I'm having to make some of the very same decisions they're making. And, they're smart and hardworking. I prefer to work with Main Street rather than Wall Street.
I can totally relate to that.
Yeah.
I don't want to get into it now, but I definitely understand where you're coming from on that. Like you mentioned before that you have a multi-million-dollar swimming franchise, and you also have like your coaching, training, leadership business. How do you balance, the time and all your efforts with these two different businesses? Because that sounds like really a lot of work.
Yeah. It's interesting because some of the folks that you've had on your podcast over the last number of months, some of them talked about work-life balance and mindfulness. And even I think you had a podcast recently about the power of sleep. I don't think it's work-life balance in the mid-20s. I think in the 2020s, it's really work-life integration, right? We're all working from home offices. We travel with our laptops, with cameras. We're on social media 24/7 if we're not careful. I don't know if I do a really good job of it. I try to stay in touch all the time. In a perfect week, it's 20 hours of this and 20 hours of that. In a perfect month, it's split down, but it is never that way. I go where the need is. Now, fortunately, Daniel, I've got some great managers working for me. I've got a COO that runs our swim school business, and she's got a management team underneath her that are really strong. And so in some respects, I'm kind of that, what the EOS model would call the visionary leader, where I'm not involved in day-to-day decisions. I set overarching budget goals. I set overarching development goals. I set overarching cultural reinforcement, but I don't necessarily have any day-to-day responsibilities in the swim school businesses we own. I lead the leaders. And then, when I'm on a coaching engagement or a keynote speech or a workshop, my team knows Andy's not available for these 4 hours, or Andy's traveling to Chicago today. And, we make it work after hours or in between. But, you asked me, how do I make it work? And sometimes I don't think I make it work very well is the problem. I'm always not quite as good as I'd like to be for whoever is needing my services.
So what do you think is like missing in the management leadership world today? Because there's a lot of people out there who thinks that if you're a manager or leader, you're just there to tell other people what to do. It's really simple. Just delegate, say, hey, Bob, do this, Jim, do that. And that's really management leadership.
Yeah. I think probably there's two extremes, and you identified the one where, I'm the boss. I just tell you what to do. Right. And unfortunately, in a lot of the SMBs, these small and medium businesses, these privately held businesses that I love to work in so much, nobody told them any different than that. They were a good line worker, so they got promoted. They've got 7 people underneath them now on 3 crews that are driving around doing service jobs, and they bark orders, and they just try to do what they did, only louder and harder. And that's not leadership. That's maybe micromanagement. And so that's the one extreme. The other extreme is the boss who wants to be so nice to their team members that they never hold any standards up. You and I've got to find the balance between those two, right? I don't want to be loved. I want to be respected. I want them to know Andy's going to make the best decision in their best interest. And in some respects, that's a personal lesson. It's not just a work lesson. That's how our home life should be conducted. Our community service should be conducted. It's the difference in some respects between being nice and truly being kind. And I think the tension for managers who are trying to become leaders is, how do I bridge that gap? I think there's one other problem in the 2020s, and that is, Daniel, a lot of people out there have confused celebrity influencers for leaders. Just because you have 10,000 TikTok followers doesn't mean you have anything to say to anybody. And so we've just short-circuited the cycle. Leadership is long and hard and slow. You never quite get it right. It's a journey. It's a series of commas, never a period. It's a lot of work.
You make some really good points. I mean, do you think, in your opinion, people are born with, good leadership? So that's something that you can learn.
Yeah. Boy, that's $1 million question. If you and I could answer that question and publish the book, we could probably both retire to a beach someplace. I do think, to be real honest, there are some people that are naturally more charismatic, maybe more the extrovert on the disc circle, if you would. They're winsome. I married a woman that was homecoming queen, and our daughter was homecoming queen both at her high school and at her university. These are women that they kind of walk in the room and the lights get brighter. People are wowed by them. I'm kind of an introverted grump. I don't have that natural thing, but can I lead? I think so. So I think the answer is yes. And I think there are some natural characteristics that make people more easily followed, right? But I think diligence and hard work and other orientedness and care and learning from experience and not making the same mistake twice or 3 times or 4 times. In my case, sometimes I have to make it multiple times before I really wake up. I think you can become a leader as well, both born and you can grow it.
That's really interesting to see that. So what exactly can you explain to the audience? What is it you do? How do you help, cultivate better leadership?
Yeah. So I've been thinking about this for many years. I've had the privilege of working with leaders all over the globe and finding out, what did these managers do that everybody recognized? He doesn't just have, she is not just, they're not just my manager. They really are a leader that I aspire to follow. And Daniel, I boiled it down to 4 simple, not easy to execute, but simple things. I call it the 4 leadership necessities. Managers who want to become high-performing leaders, first of all, they're people of conviction. They see the bigger picture. They're strategic. They see bigger and broader and further out. They get their eyes up. They're not just in charge of their corner of the plant anymore or their spreadsheet. They see the bigger picture. They're people of conviction. The second one is they're people of competence. They're not only good at what they do, but they elevate the execution of their team. So they're good at training. They're good at holding people accountable. They get the people the resources their people need to succeed. They bring competence to their team, people of conviction, people of competence. And then the third one, the one that you and I connect on so easily and naturally, I think, is they're people of character. You'll never be a better leader than you are a person. So for a manager to become a leader, they have to realize it's not about me anymore. I've got to be fair-minded. I can't have favorites. I've got to be honest. I'm self-sacrificing. Other people come before me. That rich in character that builds trust. So conviction, competence, character. And then Daniel, the element that I struggled for really quite a while early on, if you go back and look at some of my early blogs from 10 years ago, I called it consistency or consistent communication or communication squared, I think. I realized what it was. If Daniel is the type of leader that people want to follow, I realized what's really happening. Here's what Daniel is doing. He's holding people accountable. There's a goal that has been set. There's projects, there's timelines, there's quotas. He's holding people to a formal consistency. Oh, and then Daniel found out that Andy's got a parent that's having to go into a memory care, and Andy needs 2 weeks out to fly to Chicago and take care of things. He's already used up his PTO, but Daniel made it work because Daniel knew that's what Andy needed. And I recognized the best leaders I was working with, they had this ability to be both formal and personal in their leadership. And there's a word for that. It's covenant. And it's this beautiful, rich, it's kind of an old-fashioned word. The most common place we think of it is in a marriage covenant. And here in the state of Texas, it's very interesting. People who engage in a marriage covenant, it's the personal side, love and affection till death do us part, and sickness and in health, all of the romantic side. There's also a formal document that is signed by an officiant and it's submitted to the county clerk. There's both a personal and a formal side. And I finally realized that's it. When I look at guys like Daniel, who are good leaders, they hold people accountable. They've got quotas and goals and projects and deadlines and excellence that's required. And they're human first. And there's the balance of that. So conviction, competence, character, and then this covenant piece. So the model is simple. The four leadership necessities. If a manager wants to become a high-performing leader, work in those four areas. Now, it's simple, but it's not easy. I'm still working on these, and I'll be working on them for the rest of my life.
I mean, do you have advice about how, managers or leaders can start taking action towards, having these four leadership necessities not become defined, but like more,
Yeah. I mean, I think it's probably, they need to go on a questioning journey, right? If they've been moved into a management position where they want to become a leader, I think, first of all, that they need to go to their boss and say, hey, what does success look like? Give me an 18-month window. How should I be getting my team to lift their eyes up? That's that vision piece, that conviction, that bigger picture. Part of it has to do with, hey, who are our key competitors and what do I need to learn about them so that I'll know how to make sure we're driving value from our value offering? And, what's the international play here and the impact of the economic uncertainty we live in? Those are all bigger picture things that a worker typically isn't thinking about, but a manager who wants to become a leader should be. Second set of questions. Hey, what can I do to make my people successful? What kind of training do you need? What resources? Do we have the adequate tools? How can I champion for you to give you what you need and help you be able to execute better? Then the third set of questions is probably like almost an anonymous survey about, what does it take for me to become trustworthy? How do you view me as a person and as a leader? Remember that character piece. You'll never be a better leader than you are a person. And then the fourth set of questions really has to do with, where do I need to balance my expectations of my team with my understanding that they've got life waiting for them when they leave the office or the shop or the truck or they turn their camera off? I think if we can wrestle with some of those questions, we at least can begin the journey. And Daniel, I don't know you as well as I'd like to know you. If you were leading a team of 100 people and you were doing a great job, I'd still say he hasn't arrived yet. The leaders are always in the journey. We never quite get there. But if we're asking those types of questions, we're at least on the journey.
Now, do you implement these four leadership necessity principles with all different types of leaders? Because aren't there, is a leader the same as a leader in the Fortune 500 company versus a small mom and pop, service company versus like a church leader? I mean, those are really different dynamics.
Yeah. I mean, I think the four leadership necessities are timelessly true, whether it's a mom and pop shop, whether it's a church, whether it's a Fortune 500. The way they get implemented is going to be different, though. Obviously, if you're in charge of a multi-billion-dollar publicly traded company, you have audience members, shareholders, constituents that the small business owner just doesn't have to be aware of. And so it takes, a bigger picture when we come to that conviction piece than it does for me, who has 5 local businesses here in the Central Texas area. So they get implemented in different ways. But, you mentioned church. In the nonprofit world, we think if it's a church, we can't hold people accountable. No, man, a church has got to honor the stewardship of the people that are making donations. They better be expecting execution. They've got to hold people accountable to their performance. So it gets implemented differently, but I think these four leadership necessities have a fruition in every environment. Most of the work I do, as I said, is in small and medium businesses. So these are privately held companies where I become the leadership training arm of this HVAC company where they've got 400 employees and 17 managers. And I work with those managers on the very discussions that you and I are having.
Interesting to mention that, because I've hired a lot of service companies, whether it's HVAC or plumbers, and it's shocking to me how there really is. I mean, some companies, I've hired a lot of companies to help me, because I don't I'm not like a, I guess homebody like person that knows how to fix my own AC or stuff like that. So I'm always, hiring
Yep.
like, an HVAC company, helping with that. And there've been some companies, I mean, usually the service work is pretty good, but in terms of the leadership, I've noticed a really big difference. Some people have no clue. I mean, it's interesting to me is that I spoke to one manager and he was telling me that business is slowing down. And then through an investigation, because I'm a digital marketer outside of what I do on the podcasting, and what I found out is more than half the time they weren't even answering the phone. So somebody called in, asking for the service. They weren't even picking up the phone, and he was just totally clueless to that connection. So if you don't speak to the customers right away, that you're losing sales, and he was just complaining the service, and just.
Yep, I know. And that's that competence piece where part of the job of a leader is to make sure their people are executing. And so you've got to have systems in place to hold them accountable. Trust is earned. And, the problem with part of that is trust takes time to be earned. You can't earn it overnight, but man, you can destroy it overnight. And so if you're going to hire and keep and train the right kind of people, you've got to be making ongoing deposits into their capabilities and then holding them accountable to their performance.
So in your own leadership journey, have you ever had any type of challenges or setbacks that, cause you to have new life lessons when it comes to like leadership? Do you like to share with us?
Yeah. I mean, unfortunately, I don't learn very quickly. I typically have to have the same mistake happen 2 or 3 times. Early in my sales career, I moved from selling to training salespeople to training sales managers to this leadership. That's kind of been my journey. I managed an inside and outside sales team, and I had a woman that was one of my top salespeople, but she had personal life management issues. She was often late. She was winging it at the back end. We did a lot of trade shows, and she blew off a trade show. And Daniel, the very down and dirty part of the job of the sales manager is you schedule booth duty for your salespeople. And she no-showed the entire show. And we're having to double and triple people and having people. And my boss got wind of it. And my boss told me, that's it. Gwen has cost us enough. You need to fire Gwen. And Daniel, that nice thing that you and I talked about 10 minutes ago, nice versus kind, the nice guy, Andy, went to bat for Gwen. She was good. She was one of my top performers when she was on. So it wasn't like I didn't have reason to, but I fought for her job. And he said, all right, but you got to put her on performance improvement plan. I want you to hold her feet to the fire. So we got back from the trade show. The next day, we're all in the office. Gwen comes in. Daniel, I knew I needed to have a meeting with Gwen, and I don't think I slept much the night before that meeting. And I'm in my office, thinking, what am I going to say? She comes walking into the office. Before I had a chance to say anything, she quit right there on the spot. And she didn't just quit. She hurled profanities at me, at the company, this anger management. And then she stomped out, flaring at us the whole time. I had my whole sales team out. We're waiting for our weekly huddle. And she stomps through, and I'm sitting in my office, and I got to go out and figure out how to rally the troops for our new numbers. And I wish I could tell you there was a good end to this story. It wasn't just she quit us. She went across the street, went to work for a competitor and stole business from us. There was just, here was the good. I walked out into that bullpen that morning, and before I could say anything, Todd Thompson, who is still a friend of mine today, we've worked together and stayed in touch for decades at this point. He was one of my top salespeople. Todd Thompson, as I walked out trying to figure out what am I going to say to this team that I'm supposed to manage so well, he said, it sure took you long enough, because he thought I had finally fired her. They all knew I needed to fire her because of the way she was breaking all the rules and bending. And I think the lesson that I started to learn at that point is there is a difference between being kind and being nice. And I was being too nice to Gwen. And as a result, the other 7 or 8 people on my team, I wasn't being kind to them. Just because they're hurt doesn't mean they're right. And I needed to learn a little bit more backbone on that holding people accountable, that second leadership necessity of competence and execution. Now, I wish I could tell you there was a great story there. There's not a great story. As I said, she went across the street, went to work for our competitor, took business from us. If there's any good moral to that story, it's simply after that type of thing happened to me 3 or 4 times, I realized can't let people get away with stuff. You just can't let people get away with stuff.
As you said, I mean, leaders, managers many times have to make tough decisions. And a lot of times they're not easy decisions. And sometimes, nobody's really born with a playbook saying, hey, in this type of situation, this is what you have to do. Yeah. You got to be think on your feet, try to make the best decision based on the knowledge, experience, resources you have at the moment. And everybody makes mistakes. Even the best leaders have made mistakes. But I guess the question is, what do you learn from it? And what can you improve upon? So if next time a situation happens, we can make better decisions.
Yeah. I dismissed a manager about 5 months ago that had been with us for many years. And it was one of those where that truism that I shared a minute ago that I started to learn so many years ago, just because they're hurt doesn't mean they're right. I just finally had to exercise that with this team member that I dismissed several months ago, because the expense of the emotional indignation was just negatively impacting the rest of the team. Maybe if you and I could begin to summarize some of that, probably leaders, one of the things that defines a leader is they're always trying to learn lessons, right? They never arrive. They're always trying to figure it out.
So what do you think is something like the biggest topics or the biggest issues that leaders struggle with today?
Yeah. Man, I think since 2020 and even before, it's just been the relentless, exhausting amount of change being thrown at everybody. I saw a Gallup or a Forrester research article earlier this year that it blew me away, Daniel. It said 60% of the leaders they interviewed, and I'm not sure at what level this report came out at, whether it was privately held or publicly traded. If it's Gallup or Forrester, it's probably, Fortune 500 type companies. 60% of the managers that were interviewed said they would leave their current position rather than engage in another change initiative. Everybody is so exhausted with the amount of change that's coming at us that I think leaders are just, we're just beat up by it. And yet part of what we've got to do is recognize that it is as fast as it's ever been, and it's never going to be this slow again. We've got to recognize that the changes that are coming are going to be even faster and more dynamic than the changes we've dealt with. So you and I talked before we turned the cameras on, we talked about this concept of confident uncertainty, where I think leaders need to lead, in a world full of ambiguity, and you don't know if you get it right long-term, but you can be short-term right? I'm not sure what we're going to do next quarter, but this quarter, here's our goals. And we'll adjust as we see how the market responds or what our growth looks like. Confident uncertainty.
Maybe you can talk a little bit more about that, because as you mentioned, we live in a very different time now than the last, hundreds of years, with technology moving at such an incredible fast pace. And now, especially with the advent of AI, things have really catapulted to nobody can keep up, because literally every day I wake up with new emails in my email box telling me about a new, AI system and this and that. Yeah. And even certain sectors, like you mentioned, like the construction, blue collar, which meaning historically not really adopted technology. They're starting to adopt to totally new things. And to give you an example, I had one restoration company come in to see if, because I had a flood many years ago. And we were checking to see if there was water in the walls. I mean, the guy had a special app that he was detecting to see if there were water in the walls. And I was born, I didn't know. I could have done it myself because I didn't know about it. Yeah. That's just crazy. And now they have the special apps that, the sign all the documents.
Sensors built into them. Yeah. It's amazing.
Yeah, it's just really amazing. And now with AI, it's it's a huge game changer. How do you, as a leader, be confident in these uncertain technological times, especially with AI, when you don't know what's going to happen next?
So there's that second book you and I need to write. If we write that one, although it can't be a book anymore, it's just got to be a series of blogs. Nobody's reading books in an AI-driven world. Let me tell you the story about us with confident uncertainty, because, 5 years and 3 months ago now, I got the call that you got to lock the doors for all of our businesses because we were not allowed to have any social gatherings. And I had loans, I had leases, we had taken people's money, we had commitments and guarantees that we made. Daniel, we had a couple of landlords that we were required to lock our doors. And then we got a threatening letter from them saying, if you don't pay your full rent, we're going to lock you out. We're already locked out and I don't have any revenue coming in. I can't pay rent. And we didn't know what to do. But I did know what I could do as a leader the next day. And that is I could get on a Zoom call. We were still trying to figure out even how to spell Zoom at that point, or Teams or WebEx. But I could figure out how to get on a Zoom call with my school managers and say, guys, here's what we know today. Here's the CDC's ruling. We live in Texas. It's going to be more open than some of the other places. We can begin to think about this. Let's take a look at doing some outdoor pool work. And so we're going to meet today and talk about what we can do today. And tomorrow we'll jump on another Zoom call and figure out what tomorrow looks like and the day after that. And for those first several weeks, we met daily to talk about what could we do today to protect the kids that we believe, we serve families with children and we want to get them as safe in and around the water as possible. And we took it day by day. And then those calls turned into, let's do 3 of these a week because we're beginning to see a path. And we realized when we make a decision as a leadership team to do something, we're going to do it as well as we can. That's that confidence. And we're going to hold it with an open hand because tomorrow the rules might change again. There might be new understanding that comes out, new flexibility. How do we get plexiglass up between our front desk and our customers when we come back into school? And what type of masks do our swim instructors need to wear? And how do we, disinfect everything? And we took all these little steps confidently in a time of uncertainty. Thank the good Lord, those days are behind us. But I think, what you said a couple of minutes ago, it's with AI and everything else going on, life is changing so fast. I think what we need to do is lean into what we know today. For instance, let's talk about AI. This morning, I spent a couple of hours with ChatGPT doing some analysis as I'm learning about a new area that I need to be leaning into. I've got a bunch of competitors in the marketplace, leadership consultants, keynoters, trainers, who are scared of AI. And so they're not doing anything with it. I'm a little scared of AI, which means I got to lean into it. How do I learn to use it well? How do I learn to balance my voice versus AI's voice when I'm writing a leadership blog? How do I use it to do research, but not fully trust it, make sure I'm still doing my own work as well? I think part of it is you and I need to have some confidence that we'll be okay. We're going to make mistakes along the way, but we need to lean in. Confident uncertainty. In a time of uncertainty, leaders still lean in. They move forward rather than just wringing their hands and saying, I can't do anything. That's not a leader. Sorry about that lengthy answer there, but you can tell you kind of got me up on my soapbox a little bit.
No, it was good. Thank you very much. Can you maybe share like a real world example of how you help one of your clients in the leadership world with their transformation, improve upon their leadership? What does that look like?
Yeah. So I'm working with an insurance company right now that has got a really nice product. They're in a specialized niche where they really serve their customers well. And as a result, they've been able to grow pretty rapidly during the last couple of years when insurance premiums and insurance claims have just grown very substantially, and they've been able to serve well. They've got some managers who were good performers, but don't know how to hold other people accountable. And so I've been able to come alongside that firm and work with those managers on these 4 leadership necessities, particularly the competence piece when it comes to how do you coach your people? So I've shared with them a 30-minute monthly coaching conversation. We call it the FAST coaching conversation, focusing the conversation, asking good questions, talking about next steps for the salesperson. And so that's a competence skill that I've been working with this insurance company to help their new managers become leaders and not just managers by investing in their people. So those are the types of stories that are very satisfying to me. I worked with a lumber production company up in Idaho a couple of years ago that once again was experiencing significant growth, and their customer service scores were dropping pretty radically because they were late on delivery. Some of the very same things you and I talked about when we're dealing with the service teams and poor communication. And so we implemented some systems for managers to be able to help their people hold themselves accountable to improve their performance. So those are a couple of samples of work I've done recently.
And so how does leadership really impact the workplace culture and morale? What is the connection there?
Stephen Covey said more than 25 years ago, people join organizations for their job. They leave because of their boss. And I think the very things that you and I have been talking about for the last 40 minutes now are reasons people stay and reasons people leave. There's some pretty compelling statistics around when employees feel like they have an engaged boss who is helping them grow in their job, retention numbers climb very significantly. So really two things, I think. One, ultimately, all of us need to have the pulse of the customer. And whether you use net promoter scores, NPS scores, or some other survey, you need to be reaching out to find out, what do customers think of you? But you and me as managers, our real customers are the team members underneath us. And so we need to be surveying them with, what am I doing well? What can I be doing better? What systems are working? What systems are broken? How's our HR policy? How's it line up with what you're seeing? How are we helping you have the tools you need? So we just need to kind of eat humble pie as leaders and say, help me get better at leading you. And when you do that, people become loyal, right? They stay because of their boss.
I mean, how do leadership, we're talking about some of the big changes that's been happening, or the way the workplace environment has evolved over the years, is that now that, turnovers become, more prevalent. And now there's more quiet quitting, where people just quit without even giving a notice. They just, they just walk out.
Yeah.
How can leaders create a culture to retain top talent, in the world where people seem to just want to do their own thing and don't seem to
This is that third book you and I need to write, Daniel. We've got 3 multi-million-dollar books. I think it comes back to when you are growing in these 4 leadership necessities, people are attracted to you because they trust you. And that's what people are looking for. They want an environment where their work is respected, where things are stable. They don't have to worry about an anger management boss like I talked about early in my career, even pre-career. They know what's expected of them. They're rewarded for doing well. It's, Simon Sinek wrote the book a number of years ago, Leaders Eat Last. And the whole point of that book is the purpose of a good leader is to put their people in front of them. And in the mid 2020s, I'm just afraid we got it upside down. Leaders think they're at the top. Leaders are at the bottom and making everybody else successful. And now the world is never perfect, and leaders are going to make mistakes, and you're going to disappoint your team members. You're going to disappoint, but the leader that is trying to grow as a leader becomes attractive in a marketplace where employees, they're rich in choices. As you said, it's, they don't give 2 weeks notice. They just text, I'm not coming into work today. And how do you create an environment where those people care about you as a leader and manager enough that they don't want to do that to you? I think it's true, the very things you and I have been talking about for the last 30 minutes.
Also, I want to touch upon something you mentioned before. Sometimes leaders like you and me, sometimes could be a little bit too nice, and that can cause problems. But at the same time, on the other end of the spectrum, you can be seen as a complete jerk as a leader or manager, and people don't want to deal with you in that. So how do you create a balance where you're not being either too nice or a real jerk? What's the deal?
Yeah. First of all, you and I need to make sure that we're not showing any favors, right? Favorites. There's some people that I'm more naturally inclined to get along with than others, but style is different than performance. And so I need to make sure that I don't have my teacher's pets that I go out to the bar with afterwards or anything like that. Bosses should be very friendly, but that doesn't mean you are close friends with the people that report to you. You just have to manage that tension of expectations. People need to sense that you are fair-minded, that you're other-oriented and fair-minded. The other thing I would say is, leaders don't die on small hills. You don't win anything when you convince everybody that you're right and they're wrong. There are some times when you have to put your foot down because this is too big a mistake. But there are other times when, man, you don't want to be the smartest person in the room. You don't want to be the one that comes up with the fresh ideas. You want them to have permission to do it themselves. So a lot of this leadership, and you and I really are talking about a leadership continuum. The way we've defined it is nice is too much of a pushover. Harsh is too far the other direction. We're looking for kindness, kind bosses. I think it's a learned art. I think you make mistakes both ways, right? I've been too harsh in some of my quick decisions, and then I've looked the other way far too long at times. And you learn after a while, oh yeah, that didn't work for 3 times. The 4th time I'm finally waking up, and this is where I'm gonna make my stand.
So you wrote the book, The Golden Principles, and that was a bestseller. Can you maybe share audience about some the core principles from the book?
Sure. So if your listeners are on YouTube and they'll see that I've got a dog print behind me and a dog quotes behind me and a copy of that book. My wife and I have been rescuing dogs since shortly into our marriage. And the dog on the cover of The Golden Principles, Redford, was a particularly challenging. He was a breeding sire to puppy mill. More than 60 dogs were rescued. He ended up in Houston. We live in Austin area. We got word of him. We rescued him. Daniel, everything I did to reach out to him was wrong. First time I looked at him, he squatted and urinated. He hid for weeks and months. I've been on the road for pretty much my entire adult life. And Daniel, I'm one of those guys that gets the last flight out because I finished my workshop at 5 o'clock. I come walking in the house at 1 a.m. and I'll drop my briefcase and my backpack and suitcase and say, I'm home. And when I would do that, Redford on the cover of the book you mentioned would go running the other direction. And I realized part of the problem is I'm not meeting Redford where he needs to be met. And so one of the lessons in the book is the importance of a play bow. And if your listeners are dog or cat people, they've seen it. They've seen a dog do a play bow where they stretch their front paws out, they put their hindquarters up, they're wagging their tail, and it's basically saying, I'm friendly, I'm safe. Daniel, my behavior for a while when I got home was I quietly dropped my stuff on the floor inside the garage and I got down in a play bow to let Redford know. And the principle there is if you're going to lead somebody, you've got to meet them where they're at. You can't expect them to meet you where you're at. One of the other lessons, Redford had a habit of running away if we left the door cracked open. He would just bolt and I would yell at him. And then I just realized, the louder I yell at him, the faster he runs. So we turned these periodic, whoops, the garage door's open, that was a mistake, into a love fest. And instead of a harsh no when he went the wrong direction, when he came the right direction, we celebrated. A happy yes is always better than a harsh no. Once again, I see you just nodded your head. This is not just a dog lesson. This is a leadership lesson, right? And trust takes time. You don't get to show up and have people trust you because you've just been appointed boss. So the book is kind of a chicken soup for the soul. Lessons my wife and I and our family learned from these dogs that we rescued that really are life and leadership lessons. Hence the subtitle, The Golden Principles, Life and Leadership Lessons from a Rescued Dog. 10 chapters on trust and play bows, and a gentle yes is always better than a harsh no. And sometimes peers make the best leaders. Simple stories like that work at work, work at home, they work with dogs.
And you kind of touched upon something I want to ask you about, because one thing that a lot of leaders go through is burnout. It can be very taxing, especially as you mentioned, we're living in an evolved world where things are changing so fast. It's sometimes hard for anybody to keep up, and which results in burnout. I mean, what advice could you give to people who are leaders that are feeling a little bit burnt out from the current job situation?
Yeah. You've had some other podcasters on that can probably speak to that even better than me, because you've had some great guests that have really talked about kind of that balance. Here's what I know. The first job of every leader is to lead themselves. I have a series of practices that I go through first thing in the morning. I was at the gym at 6:30 this morning getting my exercise in. I have some Bible reading and devotional, and I have some journaling that I do. And I find when I start what I call the leader's hours, it's not a 60-minute hour. It's a set of time though. When I can start my day with the leader's hour, the rest of the day goes better because I develop the most important person in my life first thing. But we execute it imperfectly, right? Because life is fast, expectations are high. But if we aren't taking care of ourselves, we won't eventually be able to take care of anybody else either. We've got to practice what I call the leader's hour consistently.
So Andy, if somebody had like a question about our conversation today, what is the best way they can reach out to you?
My last name is spelled kind of distinctively, Neillie, Neillie. So if they simply go to neilliegroup.com, they'll go to my homepage and they'll see up at the top, there's a place where they can just grab a 15-minute phone call with me. And I'd be glad to, have us pick each other's brain. The other thing, Daniel, is some of these leadership conversations you and I are talking about. I have an 8-page ebook called The 3 Imperative Leadership Conversations. How to hold a hard conversation like you and I talked about, how to hold a coaching conversation like I shared recently, and then how to hold a 3-fold affirmation conversation. If your listeners would like a copy of that 8-page ebook, it's available at leadershipmaterials.com, leadershipmaterials.com, either Neillie Group or Leadership Materials. They can get access to me either way.
Can you maybe explain a little bit, what are some of your offerings of how you help, with leadership? Is it like one-on-one coaching to better leaders, or you have workshops or what?
Yeah. I primarily work with businesses. I do some one-on-one work, but it's typically where a team of leaders are going to go through an online self-assessment that I give them. I have a program called the Manager's Ascent. That's a year-long program where it's a self-assessment and then some training and some coaching. We meet quarterly, either by Zoom or face-to-face with this management team. We look at their assessments. I do some training and then some coaching and some one-on-one work. And so that's probably how most companies access me, is through a year-long engagement where I'm developing the team of their managers. But I also do keynote speeches, the golden principle that you talked about, the cover of the book. I do a lot of like trade associations where they just want somebody to give them some good thoughts about how to grow as managers. So I'll do keynote speeches for trade associations for the CEOs that are there for 3 days to work together. But most of my work is through workshops with some one-on-one coaching.
Andy, I really enjoyed talking with you. We're kind of getting to the end of the podcast.
Yeah.
You have any like final words you'd like to share with our listeners?
First of all, I just want to thank you. I've been looking forward to this. I spent some time on your website. I knew we were going to have a good conversation, and that has definitely been affirmed. Yeah, just the reality that 2 things. One, you'll never be a better leader than you are a person. True leadership starts with your own version of that leader's hour, whatever that looks like for you. And then probably the second thing I'd say, Daniel, particularly in a world full of uncertainty, leadership is always a journey. It's never a destination. It's a series of commas, not a pyramid, not a period. You and I are never going to get it right, but we're always on the journey toward getting it right.
Well, Andy, I really appreciate you coming on the show and sharing with us all your expertise and your wonderful stories and all the things that you've learned, as well as helping other businesses with their leadership management skills. I really appreciate that. It's been really wonderful. Unfortunately, we're kind of running out of time, so we kind of have to put a wraps on it.
It's been my pleasure, though. Yes.
Definitely. So I really appreciate you coming on and sharing, all your wisdom with us.
Great. My pleasure. And let's stay in touch. I look forward to continuing our conversations at some point in the future.
Definitely.